For over 2 centuries, a fragile truce between the world you see and what lives in its shadow has been enforced, not by crown, not by allegiance, but by a balance that must be maintained. Vampire houses rule their territories in silence. Lykin bloodlines guard their own with unwavering loyalty, and the Wardens, who were formed to enforce that balance. But when relics meant to remain hidden resurface, the truce begins to fracture. Savannah rests on the fault line. Warden's Mark, a novel by James Contorno. The official audiobook is now streaming, with new chapters released weekly on YouTube. Chapter 1. A Session. It all felt so real. Thank God it was just a dream, Frank told the man in the chair, though the words refused to settle. The quiet room didn't answer back. Frank sat on the edge of a couch, shoulders slumped, fingers whirring the seam of a cushion as though it were a rosary. Across from him, the man sat in a wingback chair, worn suit, old wristwatch, notepad resting lightly in one hand as if it carried no weight at all. Dim and sparsely furnished, the room felt colder than it should have. Muted light filtered through aged windows. The only warmth came from a lone lamp on a side table next to the chair, casting a tired glow across the space. It looked like a therapy session, almost like one too. Quiet room, soft lamp, the faint scent of dust and dampness hanging in the air. Anyone walking in would expect a box of tissues within arm's reach. But the room definitely hadn't been set up for comfort. Frank kept talking. It all felt so real. Thank God it was just a dream, Frank said, not realizing he'd already said it once before, or twice. The man made no move to correct him. His pen scratched across the page, a grocery list disguised as clinical note-taking. Frank went on. I was driving home from work. It was getting late, almost dark. I knew my wife wasn't going to be happy. She hounds me for working too much. He shook his head with a faint, tired smile. I wouldn't trade her for the world. Just don't let the food get cold, you know. Frank glanced at the man and gave a small laugh. The man didn't react. Anyway, I pulled into the driveway and ran inside, already rehearsing my apology. Honey, I'm home. No answer. I checked the kitchen. Food was out, but not set, still warm. I called out to her again. Nothing. I went upstairs, checked the bedroom, the bathroom. Nothing. The man listened without expression. He'd heard all this before. I came back downstairs, Frank said, already sounding tired of the memory. That's when I noticed the back door. It had been, Frank swallowed before continuing, kicked in. The pen stopped. The man looked up from the page. Say that again? The back door. It was kicked in, Frank said. The man flipped back a few pages in his notebook, already filled with notes, and checked again. Nearly everything Frank had said was there, almost word for word, except that. A soft cough. Go on, the man said, tone flat. When I saw that, I knew something was wrong, Frank continued. I called out for her again. Still nothing. He hesitated. And that's when I saw it. Frank's gaze slid past the man to the other end of the room, his expression tightening before he seemed to realize he'd done it. He stopped speaking. The lamp beside the man flickered slightly, then steadied. The man's pen paused. "Take your time," he said. "Tell me what came next." Frank kept staring at the far end of the room. "Blood," he said quietly. "On the floor by the couch. So much blood." He hunched forward, cradling his head in his hands. "I walked over and—" He tried again. "I walked over and behind the couch." "Go on, Frank." Frank looked up. It was her, on the floor. He shook his head. "So much blood." She wasn't moving. I dropped to my knees. I tried to say her name. He broke off. I couldn't breathe. He took a breath, then another. I heard something in the hallway, footsteps. His jaw tightened. There was a man. He came around the corner, heading for the back door, just walking, like he belonged there. Frank's hands curled into fists. "In my home." The lamp beside the man flickered. He noted it without shifting his focus from Frank. "This man, can you recognize him?" Frank swallowed. No. He was wearing a mask, all black." He paused. I could only see his eyes. Frank stared at the far end of the room again. I looked right at him, right into his eyes. With each word Frank spoke, the lamp flickered harder, snapping between dim and bright. I asked him why. His jaw tightened. He raised his gun. The man leaned forward just a fraction. And then? The lamp steadied. Frank exhaled, the breath leaving him all at once. Then, nothing, I just woke up. The man sank back into his chair, setting the notebook aside as he let out a slow breath, like he'd just missed his turn. Frank wiped his eyes, trying to compose himself. Near the man's chair, something began to hum more loudly than before. The sound wavered, stuttered. A red light pulsed, brightened, then dimmed again. A soft pop clicked from somewhere near the floor. Then another. The man's attention shifted, not to Frank this time, but downward. The hum deepened, rougher now, followed by a faint hiss, as a thin curl of smoke slipped from the seam of a small wooden box at his feet. "Wild dream, right? So, what do you think it all means, Doc?" Frank asked. The man let out a quiet, tired chuckle. The box sputtered, then let out one final pop before going completely dark. Smoke curled from its vents. The man looked down at it, then back up at Frank. "I'm not a doctor." Frank stopped wiping at his face, confused. "What do you mean you're not—" His form faded before he could finish the sentence, his voice warping, his image unraveling like smoke. The man sat still, eyes on the empty space where Frank had been. "I guess our time is up for today, Frank," he muttered. "There's always next week." The room was silent now, a faint cold lingering where Frank had been. The box lay dead at his feet. The man grabbed his notebook and added one last line to the grocery list. Drop-off manifester for repairs. Again. He picked up the wooden box, heavier than it looked, and headed out the front door of the dark, nearly empty house. The lamp on the table flickered once more as if calling out to him. Outside, the bright sunlight of Savannah washed over the street. Birds chirped. Leaves skittered along the sidewalk. A for sale sign creaked in the breeze. No one was buying. Not with Frank still inside. At his car, the man opened the trunk. Inside was a jumble of strange artifacts, weathered photographs, scattered files, things that didn't belong together. He placed the box among them and shut the trunk. Leaning against the bumper, he pulled out a handheld recorder and a pack of cigarettes. He hit record. Frank's recalling more about that day, but he's slow to connect it. Still can't ID the killer. Still doesn't realize he's dead. The OSMG fried again. Smoke, static, the whole 9 yards. Taking it in for repairs. Needs to be fixed before the next open house. Realtors on my ass. They always think this is like evicting a squatter. I'll tell her I need another week. 'Cause this place isn't going to sell with Frank still hanging around. And I'm growing tired of playing grief counselor to another lingering goldfish. He slipped the recorder away and lit a cigarette. 3 long drags. Then he flicked it to the pavement. Mondays. He crushed it under his boot, climbed into the car, and drove off. The sky was clear. The clouds were white. Just another day in Savannah. Chapter 2. Rhyme and Resin. Downtown pulsed with motion and sound, the city already mid-performance. A cool breeze slipped beneath a warm sun, stirring the first hints of autumn in the leaves. Spanish moss swayed lazily overhead while a saxophone wailed from a nearby corner, fast, bright, and full of swagger. Savannah never missed a chance to put on a show for the lunch crowd. Office workers rushed between buildings, clutching pumpkin spice fraps and tapping at screens, too busy to look up. Tourists drifted through that same space at half speed, pointing at architecture, dipping into shops, savoring the city, one leisurely step at a time. A teenager moved through the crowd like water through a stream. Quick steps, sharp eyes, a half smile that never quite reached sincerity. Freshly 16, though you wouldn't guess it by the way he carried himself. All easy swagger and curated style. Nothing he wore was new, but everything was chosen. Patched, borrowed, lifted, or found. He wore it like fashion, not charity. His frame was lean, built from movement, like someone used to slipping away before things got loud. His name was Resin. He knew the cobblestone streets like muscle memory. Every corner had history. Every alley a shortcut. The city let him pass. No one looked twice. He wasn't just walking, he was working. "Excuse me, sorry." A hand slid into a coat pocket. A wallet vanished. A coin purse lifted clean off a shoulder strap. Fast fingers. A loose jacket. Gone before they even realized he'd been there. Up ahead, an older couple caught his attention. Clear tourists. She clutched a crumpled Welcome Center map. He pointed the wrong way. They were bickering softly. "Need a little help? Heading the wrong way, if y'all looking for the waterfront," Resin called out. His accent thickened into full-on Southern hospitality. Tourists ate it up, like pralines and ghost tours, made them feel like they'd found a local with insider knowledge. Just 2 blocks that away. Those maps can be confusing. While he gestured, his hand dipped into the man's inner jacket pocket. A quick flick of the wrist. Wallet gone. Smooth. Clean. "If y'all hungry, try the bootlegger on River. Just head the 2 blocks, then take a right. Can't miss it. Fried green tomatoes will change your life. Tell 'em Jerry sent you." The couple beamed, thanked him, walked away, surely thinking what a polite young man they fortunately ran into. Walletless, and none the wiser. Resin waved them off, then ducked into a nearby alley. He flipped through the wallet, a little cash, some cards, a family photo. He paused. The man and the woman, much younger, posed on a beach somewhere, all sunburns and squinty smiles. A photo people keep because it reminds them of something good. This photo had miles on it, cracked corners, faded color, slightly curled from years of pocket heat. Wear that only comes from carrying it too long in the same place. Resin stared at it a second longer than he meant to. Then he shook himself out of it. The cash went into his pocket. The rest into the dumpster. The photo fluttered down last, face up. He didn't look back. He stepped onto the street, the music still in the air, his personal score, keeping time like a heartbeat beneath the city noise. This wasn't how he pictured things going, but it was what worked. He didn't steal for thrills. He stole because stopping wasn't an option. He kept it small, cash, sometimes jewelry, never much, nothing loud, nothing that followed him home, enough to get by, enough to keep moving. The streets, at least, made sense. He passed the musician without stopping, just a glance. The man stood on the corner like he belonged to it, tall, lean, dressed in a sharp beige suit, polished shoes, and a tilted fedora. The kind of style that made you wonder if time had forgotten him, or if he'd just figured out something the rest of the world hadn't. The saxophone glinted in the sunlight as he played, quick, bright, playful, like he was having a conversation only he could hear. Resin paused for just a second, dropped $1 in the sax case, then kept moving, homebound. The cobblestones beneath his boots gave way to red brick as he turned down a quieter block, one of those streets where the city bothered to dress itself up. Old Southern homes lined the walk, fading paint and polished porches. Crushed crepe myrtle petals scattered across the sidewalks like someone had thrown a party and forgotten to clean up. He cut through a block where the city seemed to take a breath. Less foot traffic, more hanging moss and wind chimes. The kind of street where people actually lived. Old money homes with trimmed hedges and porches made for sitting. That's when he heard something different. It hooked him. The music slipped through the open window, barely more than a whisper. A violin, old, aching, full of long-held breath and something too complicated to name. Resin slowed without meaning to. It wasn't loud or showy. It wasn't even particularly clean, just deliberate. It didn't sound like it was from here. Didn't sound new. The kind of music you hear in stories, played around fires, passed down more than written down. He glanced at the house, tall, quiet, too well kept to be abandoned, too still to feel lived in. The violin kept playing from somewhere inside, not live, but close. An old recording, maybe, warped by time. And then he saw him. An older man moving through the parlor, slow and hunched, each careful step pressing into the floor, as if he weighed more than he looked. The room behind him looked curated, almost like a private museum. Old books lined the walls, carved figurines rested on narrow tables, strange bottles and weathered artifacts tucked between leather-bound spines and layered tapestries. It wasn't just decorated, it was arranged. Resin didn't usually scope out places like this. Too clean, too quiet, too respectable. But something about it snagged him, just enough to settle in the back of his mind. He didn't stop, but he slowed. He walked on, didn't say a word, didn't double back, but the music trailed behind him. The house, the man, the strange calm of it all slid into the back of his mind and made itself comfortable. Chapter 3. The Warehouse. The sun had started to drop behind the skyline, staining the windows with streaks of gold and rose. By the time Resin left downtown, the streets had thinned just enough for the city to catch its breath. He cut through back streets and alleys most people didn't notice or purposely avoided. Not in a rush, but always aware. He moved with confidence, past ivy-covered brick walls and sagging porch swings, through shortcuts the tourists didn't know and the locals didn't talk about. A warehouse stood like a forgotten giant at the edge of the historic district, just far enough from the polished storefronts and tour buses that no one paid it much attention. The building loomed in the fading light, broad-shouldered and tired-looking, its windows blacked out or broken, its frame weathered by decades of storms and indifference. It looked like it had forgotten it used to be important. A bottling plant, maybe, or textile. Hard to say now. No one remembered. But Resin knew it now as something else. Home. He slipped through a gap in the fence, boots crunching over cracked pavement and weeds that had claimed their own corner of the world. The side door creaked open with a familiar groan. No lock, just friction. The inside was silent, cooler than outside, and thick with that familiar mix of rust, dust, and something faintly sweet. The wide open floor stretched out like a cathedral of shadow, beams of dying sunlight slicing through from high, broken windows. Somewhere, a bird called out like it forgot the day was ending. He took the stairs, two at a time, up to the second floor, where the old foreman's office sat like a rusted crown above the skeleton of the warehouse. The windows were streaked with years of dust. The door stuck, like always, before giving way with a grunt. Inside, the space felt not cozy exactly, but claimed, lived in. Resin was a bit of a neat freak. He flipped the light switch on the wall. The old office had clearly once been something grand. In the middle, a heavy desk sat like a shipwrecked centerpiece, its finish faded but clean, its drawers stubborn with age. Underneath, a once luxurious rug stretched across the floor, stained and threadbare in spots but scrubbed within an inch of its life. Above, a half-broken stained glass light fixture hung by a crooked chain, wires running from its base like veins. They'd rerouted power from below just to light it up again, mostly for the principle of it. Along the windowed wall overlooking the factory floor, a cracked leather couch sat flanked by two matching chairs that had seen better decades. A second couch, this one less elegant, more found than furnished, rested in the far corner, facing the freshly cleaned windows in the city skyline. A makeshift nightstand made out of bottle crates sat beside it. Resin walked to the desk, unzipped his backpack, and started pulling out the random trinkets he'd collected over the course of the day. He mostly kept cash, but he had snagged a few pieces of jewelry that might be worth something. In one of the chairs, Benny sat cross-legged, reading an old grease-stained factory manual he'd found just for fun. Flashlight in hand. He always read by flashlight, even though Resin had rigged up power from the floor below. Said it felt more private that way. "Smells good," Benny said without looking up. Resin smirked and pulled out a white paper bag, slick with the beginnings of a grease stain. "Steak and mac from Older Pink," he muttered, dropping the still warm to-go bag on the desk. Overcooked return. My boy Knox stood up for me. Classy? Benny said, peering over the book, wire-rimmed glasses slipping down his nose, hair a little too long, a little too messy. You say that like it's not, Resin replied, already reaching for utensils. They both fixed a plate and started eating. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. But halfway through his food, Resin spoke up, his voice low, like his thoughts were still somewhere else. There was this house I passed today, he said, nudging his fork against the edge of the plate. Big, quiet, clean, like it hadn't aged with the rest of the street. Benny looked up, chewing lazily. There was music coming from it, violin, but not the kind you hear on street corners. This wasn't jazzy or polished. It was slow, raw, the kind of sound that's got dirt under its fingernails. Sounded old, like it came from a place way colder than here, somewhere with mountains, real mountains. He paused, thinking. It felt like the kind of thing people used to play in a circle, just to keep warm, like maybe the music was the only thing keeping something alive. Benny blinked, then shrugged. That's cool. Resin gave a faint smile, not because he agreed, just because that was Benny. After they ate, Benny went back to his book, flashlight beams sweeping across the page like a lazy lighthouse. Resin went over to his side of the room, leaving the day's take on the desk. He needed to disconnect for a minute. He sat down on the couch and looked out onto the Savannah skyline, just barely glowing from the last bit of sunset left. Then he closed his eyes. Just for a moment. It was a ritual of sorts. It kept him sane. On the makeshift nightstand sat a picture frame, face down, always face down. Resin opened his eyes and reached for it. Inside was the only photo he had of his parents. Two faces frozen in time, smiling like they knew something he never would. They died when he was still in diapers, gone in a house fire that left nothing behind but smoke and questions. This photo was all he had left of them. Not memories, just this. What do you think this all adds up to? He asked after a long beat. Benny looked up from his book, confused. The stealing, the hiding, the pretending we're not just squatting in a building that could fall down any second. What's the end game? Benny blinked behind his glasses. Is this a trick question? Resin shook his head. I'm just tired of this being it. Benny sat quietly for a moment. Well, could be worse. Resin gave a half smile. He didn't say it out loud, but he thought it anyway. This was why they didn't talk much. 16, a kid on paper. But paper didn't sleep on a couch in a warehouse. Resin wasn't a sentimental guy, but he'd been feeling different lately, ever since his last birthday. He just felt different. He set the frame back on the nightstand, always face down. Resin turned back to the desk. His backpack sat there. Random trinkets scattered across the top. What am I going to do with this stuff? He muttered. Don't you know someone that works at a pawn shop? Benny asked, replying to the question he assumed was for him. Nah, I've been to every pawn shop in town. None of them will take my stuff anymore. What about that friend of yours? His dad has a shop, right? You talking about Louie? I don't think that's a pawn shop. Actually, I have no idea what that place is. I've only been in there once, and it's odd. But I think I did see some jewelry in there. Maybe Louie'll take the stuff. He leaned back, exhaled. I'll worry about that tomorrow. You mind if I turn off the lights? Yeah, go ahead, Benny said, flashlight already in hand. Resin flipped the switch on the wall and lay back on his couch, staring out the window. The moon's glow traced the edges of the city skyline, soft and distant. Quiet settled in. Not peace, just quiet. For now, that was enough. Chapter 4. Last Call in Savannah. In a quiet corner, tucked away in the historic district, a small local spot was winding down, the last notes of the night drifting lazily through the room. The final notes of the saxophone hung in the air like smoke, slow, smooth, and just a little sad. A tune made for closing time. Luther, still in his beige suit, stood with his eyes closed for a beat before he cracked a smile and gave a small bow. The corner bar erupted in light applause. Not roaring, just warm, familiar. Half the people there had seen him play a dozen times before. Every time, they clapped like it was the first. That's it for me, folks, he said, voice low and honey thick. Y'all be good. He set the sax down gently in its open case on a table and made his way back to the bar where his hat and drink were waiting. Bourbon on the rocks, with a twist of lemon and a sprig of mint. The ice was half melted by this point. A group of regulars raised their glasses as he passed. Sounded real fine tonight, Luth. That last one damn near made me cry. You ever put out an album? I'll be your first customer. Luther chuckled. Y'all are sweet talkers. Don't go spoiling me now. He sat down at his stool, lifting the glass for a slow sip. Geneva, the bartender, leaned over to top him off without asking. On the house, she said, for the encore. There wasn't an encore, she winked. There could be. The bar had thinned out now, chairs flipped on tables, lights dimmed. Outside, the neon sign hummed a tired lullaby. Luther stayed for a few more minutes, chatting soft with Geneva at the end of the bar, laughing low at an old joke. He didn't rush. He never did. Eventually, he stood, stretched, and let out a satisfied sigh. All right, y'all. This old man's got to walk it off before I fossilize. He packed up his saxophone, shook a few hands, gave Geneva a kiss on the cheek, and stepped out into the hush of the Savannah night. Behind him, Geneva flipped the open sign to closed. The streets were soft now, quiet. Luther strolled like he had all the time in the world, jacket unbuttoned, saxophone in hand, hat tilted just so. He didn't look like a man leaving work. He looked complete. A few blocks down, a sharp reminder hit him. Guess it's time to break the seal, he muttered, veering off between two buildings. The alley was dark. Savannah had hundreds of them, thin veins threading behind her polished skin. Damp bricks, slick with old rain, narrow walls. Steam rose faintly from a nearby vent like a ghost exhaling. Luther had used this one before. Familiar footing. Tonight, though, the shadows felt thicker, hungrier. He leaned against the wall with a groan, unzipped, and let out a long breath. Chuckled at something someone had said back at the bar. Then he heard it. A scrape, like a whisper, buried beneath the city's hum. He straightened, turned slightly, eyes squinting into the dark. You good, friend? He called. Didn't mean to interrupt, if you're already using the facilities. No answer. Then a flicker of movement at the alley's end. The warmth drained from his face. "I got nothing but brass and breath," he said, voice still calm. "Ain't worth much to anyone." Still nothing. Then he saw them. In the darkness of the far alley, two glints of red caught the light. Too high, too still. Eyes, unblinking, fixed on him with a patience that didn't feel human. The air thickened. Sound slipped away. The crickets fell quiet. Even the night seemed to hold its breath. His fingers tightened around the sax case. Then the shadow lunged from the dark, so fast it felt less like a motion and more like a decision. One moment, Luther was upright. The next, his skull cracked hard against the wall with a wet thud. The saxophone case flew from his hands, burst open on the ground. Brass gleamed, then red. He tried to scream, but the air had already left him. Claws gripped his shoulders like iron hooks. Fangs tore, not bit, tore into his throat. Veins shredded, flesh pulled apart. Blood sprayed the wall in wide arterial arcs, hot, violent, then slower. Luther kicked once. A shoe came off. His foot scraped the bricks. Then nothing. His body hung limp, twitching only when the thing feeding pressed harder. It didn't rush, just fed. Steady, jaw working, throat pulsing with each swallow. The mouth pulled away, red drunk and reverent. The creature crouched over him for a beat longer, then slipped backward into shadow. Luther slumped to the ground, like a marionette with cut strings, eyes wide, mouth still parted mid-word. Blood puddled slowly beneath him, catching the moonlight in a dull, glistening smear. The last sound was a hollow breath escaping his chest. Then silence. Just the moon, the alley, and a broken tune lying in a saxophone case, still catching the light. Chapter 5. Morning Light. Morning crept in slowly, streaks of light slipping through the cleaner panes of the warehouse office windows. Dust drifted through the air, soft and unhurried. Resin rolled toward the back of the couch to escape the glow, then gave up, surrendering to the day. No alarm, no urgency, just Savannah waking beyond the walls. Benny was passed out on the couch, one arm draped over his face, the other still loosely holding a book across his chest. The flashlight lay dead beside him, its battery surrendering hours ago. Resin sat up, rubbed the sleep from his eyes, and stretched until his shoulders cracked. He moved with the lazy precision of someone who didn't have a schedule, but still had a plan. He cleaned up the paper plates and to-go bag from the night before, then packed a few small items in his bag. 2 watches, some earrings, a few bracelets, just enough to maybe catch Louie's interest. Then he slipped out. The city was alive but not quite loud yet, the kind of morning where you could actually hear your own footsteps on the sidewalk. Resin walked with a loose stride, hands in his pockets, taking the long route. He stopped at a little cafe tucked just off East Bay, a place with a crooked sign and strong coffee served in paper cups that always leaked a little at the seam. The owner didn't ask questions. Resin liked that. Coffee in hand, he made his way to the river walk. The air carried the scent of salt and early freight. He found a spot along the railing and leaned against it, letting the breeze thread through his jacket. The river was busy this morning, barges low in the water, tugboats slicing through the current. Food delivery trucks dropped off seafood fresh from the boats. A couple jogged by, headphones in, breath steady and rhythmic. Resin sipped his coffee slowly. He didn't rush moments like this. He liked the little things, the smell of the river, the warmth of the cup in his hands, the gulls circling overhead. It was the closest thing he got to peace. When the cup was nearly empty and the barge he'd been watching disappeared down the bend, he pushed off the railing and turned toward Bull Street. A blaring air horn cut through the quiet morning. Resin jumped back just in time as a freight truck barreled past without slowing. The cobblestone street made it jump and jerk like it had no suspension left. The truck itself looked like it had been stitched together from scrapyard leftovers. Sun-faded paint, rust blooming along the edges, and tires worn smooth from too many miles and not enough mercy. Far from fancy, but capable. Like it had hauled things no one wanted to talk about and never once asked questions. The logo on the cargo door had been stenciled in a deep green, Zvernov Transport Group. The letters were faded but unmistakable, a brand, not just a name. And at the bottom, a crooked "How's my driving" sticker. The truck rolled on. Resin watched it disappear down River Street, the tension in his chest easing just enough to exhale. Resin headed south. The Zvernov freight truck rumbled into the JW's private loading dock. The engine let out a tired growl, its frame vibrating as if it had carried too much for too long. The JW wasn't just a hotel, it was a performance. Officially, it was the JW Marriott Savannah Plant Riverside District, though no one called it that. Around town, it was simply the JW. It looked less like a hotel and more like a power station, reimagined with a museum's budget and a stage designer's flair for the dramatic. Towering fossils loomed over the lobby under sculpted beams of light. Artifacts glittered behind glass, staged for admiration. Geodes sat cracked open. The floors reflected everything except warmth. The air itself felt curated, cool, scented faintly with stone and polish, like time had been filtered out of it. Guests didn't just check in. They entered slowly, spoke softly, drifted like museum goers. The place whispered luxury, its history still visible beneath the polish. Out back, at the loading dock, two large men climbed down from the truck and swung open the cargo doors. A hotel staffer stepped out to meet them. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" One of the men handed over a folded invoice, silent, direct. Inside the cargo bay sat a single crate, unmarked, nearly as tall as the men and almost as wide. The staffer glanced at the invoice, brow tightening just a touch. "Ah, okay. The new exhibit. I'll grab a cart for—" He stopped mid-sentence, watching as the men lifted the heavy crate with practiced ease and carried it inside without waiting. No reply, no struggle. Just two sets of steady footsteps fading into the building. On his way through the historic district, Resin cut across the squares, weaving through the city like someone who belonged there. Tour groups passed him, flip-flops, sun hats, cameras out, snapping photos of buildings that hadn't changed in hundreds of years. Resin moved between them without effort. Same jacket, same boots, same rhythm. But he was off the clock. The shop sat tucked away just past the south end of Forsyth. The kind of place you only notice if you're looking for it. You could walk past it 3 times and never see it. A bit of a hike. Worth it, probably. If Louis is behind the counter, this is easy. He owes Resin a favor, or 10. A few blocks up, he realized he was near that house again, the one from yesterday. The music still lingered in his mind. It was just a block to the right. He didn't mean to turn. He did anyway. As he got closer, he could hear it. The music, still playing. The window stood open. The smell of breakfast drifted out from the kitchen, warm and domestic. It should have been ordinary. It wasn't. He found himself at the window before he decided to be. The room was clean, too clean, everything arranged with deliberate precision, untouched by the mess of living. From down the hall came the steady scrape of a spatula against a pan. Resin felt something before he understood it. Just inside the open window, on a table inches from the sill, sat a dagger, polished wood handle, fine engravings along the blade, green stones set into the hilt, glinting in the morning light. It should have been just another object in a room full of them. It wasn't. His eyes locked on it. A tightness formed low in his chest, familiar but not from memory. The music dulled. The clatter from the kitchen blurred just the dagger. For a second, he had the strange impression it had been waiting there, waiting for him. The thought should have unsettled him. It didn't. Just one thing. The old man wouldn't even notice. Resin stretched his hand out, fingertips hovering over the dagger. A hard metallic bell rang. Resin froze. The sound echoed once more before he recognized it, an old rotary phone ringing in the living room. From down the hall, a spatula tapped against the rim of a pan. The hallway floor started to creak under the old man's weight. Footsteps toward him, slow, unhurried, closer. He should have pulled back. He didn't. His fingers closed around the handle. Warm. He dropped below the sill just as the old man stepped into the room. Resin's heart pounded. He didn't move. He tucked the dagger into his jacket. The warmth lingered. The old man crossed to the phone and lifted the receiver. Resin slowly slipped away towards the street and didn't look back, walking like nothing happened. Inside, the old man chatted pleasantly on the phone. He paused. His nose twitched. Sniffing the air, he smelled something. And it wasn't sausage and potatoes on the stove. Warden's Mark, a novel by James Contorno. The official audiobook is now streaming. Experience the full audiobook with new chapters released weekly on YouTube.